Hello, you're with BBC News Live, and if you are somebody who has tried to book yourself in for a driving test recently, then chances are you've probably not had a very good or fast experience. This is our business correspondent, Simon Browning, and he, as with us, have been hearing many of your experiences of trying to get yourself booked into a test across Great Britain, England, Wales and Scotland, because from today there are new rules that are aimed at making the system perhaps a little bit faster, but certainly aimed at making it fairer. So we'll be hearing some of your questions on that, as well as your experiences as well. But Simon, you have been getting a pretty up-to-date picture, in particular when it comes to waiting times, from the Driving Standards Agency.
Yeah, that's right. I've been talking to them this afternoon. They gave me some up-to-date figures, and these are the waiting times as of the end of April across Great Britain. So the figure for the whole of Great Britain, the average wait time is 22.3 weeks. In England, 22.7 weeks. That's just slightly higher than the British average. Scotland, 22.9 weeks. And in Wales, that's the shortest lead time at 17.3 weeks. Those figures are fresh, and they give you a really strong reflection here of what learner drivers are facing across Britain when trying to get a test. And this is why structurally the system has become so difficult for learner drivers to navigate, with such long lead wait times, as we'll talk about the impact of bots and technology. And we've got to remember that driving is such an inherent, important part of people's lives. Transport, it's so vital for us to get to college, work and school. So yeah, big problems here.
And we should just say as well, for comparison and for context, before the pandemic, so near the beginning of 2020, around 6 weeks was the length of the waiting times, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, that's right. The pandemic is structurally, unfortunately, where all these problems have come from. Figures released by the National Audit Office earlier on last year said that during the pandemic between 2019 and 2020, more than 1.5 million tests were missed. And that backlog has never really recovered structurally through the system. Now, the DVSA and the Department for Transport, which is effectively the overseer of the DVSA, have tried various methods to try and increase the number of tests that can be put through the system across the country. That's included putting more examiners into the system to obviously try and increase that backlog, but unfortunately, the pay rates, unfortunately, for some of the examiners are very low. It scores pretty unsatisfactorily on many points. For job satisfaction, they've actually had a lot of people leave the profession because of the volume of tests that they've wanted to do. The government has made other concessions. They've brought in driving examiners from the military to try and speed up. One instructor I spoke to yesterday says that has had some effect. But again, it comes right back to the pandemic and the core problem. And then as that huge build-up of people wanting to get to their tests grew, unfortunately, that's when the scams have begun. Because when people sense a problem, unfortunately, scammers, they see an opportunity, and that is where the bots have come into this booking system and have caused so much damage and lengthy problems, lengthy waits for these learners, as we can see in these figures that we've just got. Yes,
and so I should say then we're together for the next 10 minutes or so, and we will set out exactly, you'll hear what the new rules actually are. We'll hear about some of your experiences, as I say, and fundamentally whether it's thought that the new rules will help. But Simon, you have been hearing about some of these experiences firsthand.
Yeah, that's right. I was out yesterday morning, first thing out at 8 o'clock. I went to Watford, just above North London, to meet a driving instructor. Sophie is very active on TikTok. That's where I found her. She does courses and talks to learners, firstly about how to pass your test, and also about trying to avoid these scams. So I went to meet her, and then another learner, Robert, contacted the BBC via Your Voice, and I dashed down to Croydon to meet him. He bought tests from scammers that were sold by bots because he was so desperate to pass his test, he wants to join the police. So here's the report featuring both the learners and the instructors.
Social media is filled with people's struggles to get a driving test. Maureen logged on before 6 a.m. to join the DVSA queue, and for many, it's a 5-month wait for a test. Sophie, a driving instructor in Watford, speaks to learners daily about how not getting a driving test is limiting their lives. Huge numbers of driving tests are bought by scammers from the DVSA website using bots, and they sell them on at hugely inflated prices.
The black market has taken advantage of this, knowing that there is such a demand, and people have found ways to manipulate the system to be able to book thousands of driving tests themselves to then be able to resell on for a massively high inflated fee.
Sophie showed me thousands of messages with tests for sale across the country.
Many people message me on social media telling me that they are being asked to pay 200, 250, 300 pounds for a driving test. And sometimes, unfortunately, it's from their own driving instructor they're being asked to pay this.
And why are driving instructors charging hundreds of pounds to learners then?
Easy way to make money.
Ripping them off?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Since the pandemic, the driving test booking system has been overwhelmed. The government brought in military examiners to cut wait times, but abuse by instructors using learners' details fraudulently has been a core problem. From today, only learner drivers can book and manage their driving tests, and from next month, they can only swap them within their local 3 test centres.
Robert, good to meet you.
Robert bought tests from resellers. He needs a licence to join the police and contacted the BBC's Your Voice.
So when I first got for my driving test, which was £242, I didn't pass it, which is, what you got to do? But I did it again, £242, and again, the third time in a row. A total maximum I paid was £726 for the driving test. It's a struggle because at the moment we are going for cost of living crisis and job market is competitive for us youngsters.
Drivers should only now pay £62 for their driving test with the DVSA, more at weekends. The DVSA wants to stop exploitation, so it's now against the law for third parties to book a learner's test. We'll wait to see if they obey the law and if waiting times come down. Simon Browning, BBC News.
And that's a question we will get to before we leave you today. A little bit of good news for Robert, we should say, by the way, Simon. He's passed his test now, hasn't he?
He has passed his test. Three attempts. He spent more than £740. And he also was asked to pay by the driving instructors £160 just to use the car during the test. So actually his total bill was more than £1,000 for those 3 tests.
Yeah, a big
it's just enormous.
Yes. Well, also with us to go through some of your experiences and stories and, of course, your questions, we're joined by Carly Brookfield, who's the Chief Executive of the Driver Instructors Association. It's good to have you with us, Carly. So let's go through then a few of the messages that we've had into us here at BBC News. There's a message here from Ali, who's based in London, saying that when they tried for the first time to book a driving test, they logged on really early before 6 a.m. and they were more than 22,000th in the queue, which is an awful lot of people. I needed to get one in the nearest city to my parents, which was 130 miles away. We have friends whose driving instructors have said that if they pay an agent, in quote marks, then it's £300. So the question is how do, Carly, let's give this one to you, how do the new rules prevent fraud like that from happening?
I think we've first of all got to be very careful with the use of the word fraud here and identifying that with driving instructors, which has been done a few times in the news coverage, because yes, they would like the public to think it's driving instructors who are committing fraud. And in reality, the third parties are quite independent from driving instructors. I'm not saying there's some bad actors out there, but there's no solid evidence of enough driving instructors doing bad things. These third parties are able to fraudulently use both an instructor's details to access the system and the pupils, and that's the problem they're trying to stamp out right now. So those are the challenges that you're hoping these booking rule changes are going to stamp out, but sadly, we're cynical that they're actually going to have that impact at all.
And why are you cynical about that? Because you're right. So it's basically, the rule is only you yourself as the learner can book your test now, whereas before it was the driving instructor. And we saw in Simon's report cases of where, driving instructors can be approached to pay these huge sums or get these huge sums paid. But so why are you cynical about it?
Okay, so number one, I'm cynical because DVSA have never actually supplied any solid evidence on the number of actual approved driving instructors that have been identified as engaging in fraudulent activity. We've asked them for those figures. They haven't been produced. They've actually admitted in one meeting with us as stakeholders, it's less than 3% of the third parties acting as rogues in the system. As I said before, the majority of third parties reselling tests will either present to the pupil as an instructor and they're not, or they'll be fraudulently obtaining the instructor's details and passing themselves off as instructors. So there's a big problem that we need to correct in terms of assumptions here. ADI's approved driving instructors have been very much scapegoated in this scenario, and they're not the significant problem, a significant actor in the whole. The other thing I'd say about why am I cynical? Well, one of the first changes that was made under these new rules was to limit the number of swaps. And what they've instituted to manage that is the most ludicrous system I've ever seen a government agency employ. To swap a test now, you will have to find somebody who wants to swap with you for the dates and times you want. You will both have to get on the old-fashioned phone, as it were, with a member of DVSA staff present at the same time to make that swap. That is not the digital first forward thinking solution one would expect a government agency to deploy. And the problem of all of this is it's given rise to a whole new set of third-party apps who will match pupils for a fee with a test swap. Call it Tinder for driving tests.
Well, so on a few of the points you raise, I'll say that we've actually got a question in from somebody who's had to be on the phone to the DVSA to try and change test points. So we'll get onto that in just a moment. The DVSA, though, say that their changes will mean that it will be against the law for third parties, including cancellation finders, to book driving tests on behalf of learners, and that it's all part of their attempts to crack down on third parties exploiting learner drivers. But I know, Simon, you have been speaking to the DVSA as well in terms of their aims. I mean, what would they say to some of the cynicism and criticism?
I think there is absolutely cynicism. The driving instructor that I was with yesterday pointed out that it seems as though that those that are booking these tests have very little regard for the law anyway. They are booking and using bots in huge volumes to book thousands of tests at once. Yes, from today it will be against the law for anyone but the learner to book that test. But actually, do these companies, who are these third parties who are booking these tests in huge volumes, do they have the regard for the law in quite the way that's going to stop them actually still harvesting these tests in huge volumes? Now, speaking to the DVSA today, obviously these changes today to only allow the learner driver to book the test are part of a suite of measures that have been brought in. Others that are going to come in June, in next month, is to only allow the learner driver to book their test, if they rebook it on a couple of occasions, to only use the 3 local test centres around them. That is then meant to stop this kind of harvesting nationally of tests that goes on. So if bots may book tests that are in Inverness, it will book it because it sees it available. It will apparently sell it to a learner 100 miles away from where they're geographically located, and try and bring the sphere of tests more locally to where these people are learning, to where test centres are, to where driving instructors are located, to try and rebalance the system so that they can see actually where the demand for tests is, rather than the bots booking them in huge volumes and there being a massive geographical disparity because the technology is booking the slots and no one can really understand where the demand is.
Okay, well, we can now hear from Ali and her 18-year-old daughter, Emily.
I woke up this morning ready to sit my driving test, but unfortunately I received an email saying that it had been cancelled and that it had been moved to next week.
The new date that was offered is when Emily's sitting one of her A-level exams, so she's not able to do it. Because it's within a week, we have to ring the DVSA in order to try to get a new date for the test. After 6 phone calls this morning, including being cut off and staff not really seeming to understand the process, we haven't been able to get a new date at any point between now and September. Therefore, Emily now has not got a driving test date.
And due to the new system, I won't be able to use a cancellation app, which this would have previously resolved the situation so that I could have swapped to a date that I would have been able to do. So it's much harder under the new system to resolve this situation.
Well, we have asked the Driving Standards Agency about some of the concerns there raised by Ali and her daughter Emily. They say they can't comment on specific individual cases, but did say to us that this will be the end of the road for unofficial driving test booking services as the new rules come into effect, but also specifically on something that Emily was saying there, that the changes mean it will be against the law, not only for third parties, but also for cancellation finder services to be used, as I mentioned. And that the new measure will make it fairer for learner drivers when booking and managing their driving test. So that's what they pointed us towards. But You heard there, Simon, some of, again, the criticisms of even the new system in place when it comes to the likes of cancellations.
I think that what we've just heard there has been a very, very common problem for lots and lots of learners who unfortunately either given their details to third parties, to driving instructors, and unfortunately the use of learner drivers' details have been manipulated, unfortunately, and tests are rebooked and resold to other people. And unfortunately for that young lady who's desperate to pass a driving test, as we hear, they're the victim of this. And this new measure is to stop third parties getting access to the booking system, the DVSA booking system, and booking and altering and amending the tests. Because the new law is that today, as we've said, only the learner driver can book, manage and amend their tests.
And we heard from Robert in your report the other side of the coin when third parties are able to get involved in the system, and people like him are left paying hundreds.
Robert was left desperate to pass his driving test, wants to join the police and had to pass quickly. But Sophie, the instructor who I was with, was also showing me yesterday afternoon just the sheer volume of tests that are available on WhatsApp groups that third parties are desperately trying to sell all the time. I saw them with my own eyes, and they were tests for May and for June in the coming weeks that were for sale for hundreds of pounds.
Yeah, we can see it on screen just now as well. Scrolling through all the messages and offers she was telling you that she'd received.
Thousands. Like she said, there's hundreds every day. Now, the sad fact is that, unfortunately, many of these tests are then not purchased. So the tests don't end up being completed. So there are tests that are not fulfilled at test centres every day because the bots have bought up all of these tests. They go for resale by these third-party groups, and then people choose to not buy them. So the tests go unused. So you go into test centres, and there's tests that are going unused. I think we've had somebody contact us today.
Yes, you jogged my memory there actually, Simon, because Anne in Reading spoke about this point exactly, saying she was also shocked by the number of, quote, no-shows listed at Bury St Edmunds, which is where they had to end up going despite living in Reading, because it was the nearest place they could find a test, with the question being, what does happen if someone doesn't show up for a test?
Well, I'm assuming it would be cancelled. Look, in the National Audit Office investigation that was published by the National Audit Office last year in December to look at the structural issues within the DVSA and the DFT, there is a figure here that 1.96 million driving tests were provided in 24 and 25, with 1.83 million conducted and the rest not conducted for reasons outside of the DVSA's control. So that's almost 110,000 tests that have not been completed. I mean, that's a staggering amount of driving tests when we've got so many people who are desperate to do it and they're going undone. Now, we can't directly causally link those two, but that's what the driving instructor has told us yesterday, and there is in black and white in the figures from the National Audit Office of the number that are not being sat.
Staggering maths as well from you on the spot.
Oh,
there.
Sorry, let's not look too closely.
No, but it's a very well made point. I've got also here from Conda in Slough saying, I don't think that the above changes will have any impact on the booking system. I'm trying to book a test for my son. I used to wake up at 5 a.m. with the wait in the queue. Booking opens at 6. So how will the issue of bookings disappearing within seconds be resolved while people are still using automated scripts to book slots? So Carly, perhaps you could help us with an answer to this question in terms of what these new rules are doing to specifically tackle bots bulk buying slots.
Well, they're using the unique identifier that people only been able to book to try and eradicate that attack by multiple bots. But frankly, the bots will always find a way around, sadly, to some degree. I don't think it's going to be to the degree they were able to make hay whilst the sun shined before, but I think they will find some way in there. The challenge is that, people are now not going to be able to be assisted by their instructor in booking that slot. At least when people were sat in queues before trying to get a test, their instructor was sat in that queue with them trying to get them a test too. And people's are already reporting that they're finding it frustrating that whilst they might have felt that themselves only booking the test was a good thing when they were consulted on it, they're now realizing that's biting them because they'd like their instructors to also be trying to get a slot with them. But there have been things that the agency's done that has been productive to stop the rot of the bots. But the reality is we've also got this massive test supply issue that, if there's not enough tests going in, people will still not be able to get a test anyway. And that goes back to the examiner supply issue.
Carly, do you think that the DVSA and the DFT is finally sitting up here and responding appropriately to the structural issues that are plaguing this sector, and meaning that so many drivers, young and old, are just not being able to get a test? Or is this just not enough?
I don't think it's enough. And I'm probably closer to the issues in many ways than many other stakeholders commenting on this today, because we are a first tier consultative stakeholder. We sit with their teams trying to engineer this solution. And we actually see some of the personnel involved in this frustration too. They want to do a good job, but I don't think they're being enabled to do a good job, and they're not being given the resources, legislatively, policy-wise, and otherwise, to do that. So it's a massively frustrating thing for the good guys at DVSA who are trying to fight the good fight. It's massive frustration for driver instructors because they've now been banned from the system, made illegal in terms of the system, and scapegoated for problems when the majority aren't doing anything wrong. And God knows it's frustrating for people and their parents, because of the scenarios you've outlined today. And I'd like to do a bit of a Jeremy Corbyn, if I can, and take those names from you for when I have a stakeholder meeting next week, so I can raise each individual case and personalise it, so we can show, DVSA personnel who are the decision makers, and the CEO will be at that meeting, the new CEO, what's the impact on the ground of pupils, how their own systems and system changes are in some degrees working against pupils.
Well, when these rules were announced towards the end of last year, Transport Secretary Heidi Alexander said limiting third parties from reselling slots would stop people being exploited by online bots. Of course, the majority of these rules coming into force today, so it is a little bit of a wait and see game. We had some of the new rules come towards the end of March, and as you were saying, another particularly around locations coming at the beginning of June. We can now hear from Hannah, who's a 22-year-old driving instructor.
We have nothing up here. You've got to learn to drive, and I think that's maybe why our demand is so high up here. And there's so many instructors, but all of us don't have availability. I really hope the wait in the driving test changes.
So she's speaking to us there from the Highlands, from Thurso. And so what is being done, or do any of the new rules, Simon, actually have a direct impact on some of the demand, particularly if you're in a non-urban rural area?
I think the demand is a core problem, because so many instructors actually have huge waiting lists. Sophie, who I was with yesterday, she's got an 8-month waiting list just for people who want to start driving with her, but she can't progress enough people through the system because she can't get enough tests to get them through. So structurally, obviously, the increase in the number of tests, increase in the number of people that have got access to tests, is obviously going to make the big changes that need to happen to get more people passing through the system with a successful outcome. Yes, we need more tests, we need more examiners, but as we know, more people need access to these tests, and that needs to change with the removal of the bots within these systems to open it up to a more fairer booking system for people to book these tests.
So Carly, before we draw to a close then, what does happen, or what will happen if the rules are broken? We're told, it's against the law, you can't be booking a test for somebody else or using these third agents. What's the consequence?
Well, there's huge consequences for a driving instructor fan to be breaking the rules, because they are a government licensed and government sanctioned and regulated person. So they can have their training license removed if they are found to be doing something which is called not fit and proper behaviour, which would be, booking tests on behalf of their pupils now that it's been made illegal. The deterrents for the pupil are not as clear cut at the moment. There are sanctions for pupils, but they've not made those as evident in their communication. I think that's always been a big gap for DVSA. They keep pointing to changes in consumer behaviour. Pupils are booking tests much sooner in the process than they used to as a result of the waiting times. Some are leaping too soon to take a test. That's why they're having to face a retest, because they're just not ready for that first test. And so, some more stuff from DVSA around, what is it that's going to be a deterrent for the pupil in their behaviour around booking tests would be, something that's quite beneficial in this entire process. So sanctions for everybody need to be there to make sure the system is being used properly by everybody, because let's face it, while somebody is flogging tests for 250 quid, people who know that they shouldn't be buying those tests for that money are fueling that fire, as Simon said. So we've got to see a little bit more of a deterrent for pupils and parents as much as a deterrent for instructors actually exists.
And Simon, we've spoken a lot about how the Driving Standards Agency are focusing on kind of making the system fairer, and we've heard the huge sums of money that are being spent in order to get a driving test, but We've heard for years now the long waits for a test when you need your car to be able to go to work, or even just, if your friends can drive and you've just turned 18 or you're going to college, you're getting your first job. It is crucial for so many people. So in terms of whether these rules have the impact that learners and authorities and instructors will want them to have, where are we at for that?
I'm sorry to say there isn't going to be a boom and a huge emergence in driving tests in the immediate future. These changes are going to take time to bed in throughout the system. The DVSA has said this afternoon, things like this take time. They have to make observations of what's going on. Maybe we'll see some changes by the end of the summer into the autumn as these things start to take effect. But as I've highlighted right at the start, the current waiting times for a driving test across Great Britain, the average is 22.3 weeks. That is 5 months, and that is just not going to be corrected in the flick of a switch. It's just not. So yes, the DVSA says it's trying to do as it can. The government has said it is trying to end the exploitation of learners. That's why they brought these changes in. But currently at 22.3 weeks, it's going to take time to tackle this backlog and the number of people that want driving tests. But they say they are trying to make changes to improve the situation for people.
Yes, okay. Well, Simon Browning, thank you very much for joining us here. And also thank you to Carly Brookfield, who's from the Driving Instructors Association. It's really good to be able to have your input as well. But you can find out more information and a bit of a recap of the new rules that have come into force today around booking yourself a driving test if you head to the BBC News website. But thank you very much for being with us.